Hello and welcome. Every single organization out there has to protect its data, but how do they decide which threats to tackle first? Where do you even start? Well, that's where risk management comes in. And today, we're going to break down exactly how it all works.
So the material for this comes from an excellent module by Professor Simon Mena Karume. This is such a critical topic in our digital world, so let's just jump right in.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to figure out what risk actually is, from a few different angles. Then, we'll take it apart, piece by piece, and walk through the entire assessment process. After that, we'll look at the tools of the trade and finish up by understanding the absolutely crucial role of the auditor.
Okay, let's dive into this. The first thing you've got to understand is that risk isn't just one simple thing. Different frameworks look at it through totally different lenses, and each one gives us a unique and really valuable perspective.
First up, we have the view from ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. Now, they take this really high-level strategic view. They see risk as anything, and I mean anything, good or bad, that creates uncertainty around a company hitting its goals. So it's not just about tech, it's about the entire business.
Now let's contrast that with the perspective from NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. This one gets way more technical, way more granular. It breaks risk down into specific ingredients. A threat, like a hacker, taking advantage of a vulnerability, like some unpatched software. This is the kind of definition you're going to hear from the folks deep in the trenches of IT security. And what's really interesting is how these all fit together. So think of it like this. ISO gives you the 30,000-foot strategic view. NIST gets down on the ground, giving us the technical details to measure things. And then you have COBIT, another key framework which is all about governance, making sure the right controls are in place to manage IT risk.
So here's the bottom line, especially for an auditor. These frameworks aren't fighting each other. Nope. They're all part of the same toolkit. You use ISO to check if you're aligned with the business strategy, NIST for the nitty-gritty technical assessment, and COBIT to see if the controls and governance are actually working.
Okay, so we've got the definitions down. Now let's pop the hood and see what a risk is actually made of. What are its fundamental building blocks?
So every single risk can be broken down into these 5 core parts. You start with an asset. Let's say it's your customer database. Super valuable, right? Then you've got a threat, maybe a ransomware attack. And that threat looks for a vulnerability, a weakness, like an employee who accidentally clicks on a phishing link. And if that happens, boom, you've got the impact, which is all the damage, and the likelihood, which is just the chance of it all happening in the first place.
And this all boils down to a really simple but powerful formula. At the end of the day, risk is just how likely something is to happen multiplied by how bad it'll be if it does. This little equation is pretty much the foundation of all risk analysis.
Okay, we have the theory, we have the formula, but how do you actually do this stuff in the real world? Let's walk through the steps organizations take to manage risk, blending the best ideas from both ISO and NIST.
It's a really systematic process. It's not random. First, you define your scope. Let's stick with our online banking platform example. Then, you identify the risks. You brainstorm all the bad things that could happen, like phishing or weak passwords. Next, you analyze them. How likely is this? How bad would it be? Step 4, you evaluate and prioritize. Phishing is probably a big one, so it goes right to the top of the list. Then, you treat the risk, implementing controls like multi-factor authentication. Of course, you've got to document everything, and then, and this is key, you monitor and review. It's a living cycle, right? It never really stops.
And right here, this is where the auditor becomes so incredibly important. Their job isn't just to look at the final report. No way. They're digging into the entire process to make sure it's solid, to check that every step was done right, that the documentation is accurate, and that it's all kept up to date. So, what are the tools of the trade that support this whole process? And what are the big picture strategic calls an organization has to make? Let's take a look.
You're gathering all this amazing data about risks, vulnerabilities, and controls. But where does it all live? You need a central hub, a single source of truth.
And that is the risk register. Seriously, think of it like the master spreadsheet or the command center for everything related to risk. It captures every single detail, the asset, the threat, the vulnerability, the scores, the controls, and it even assigns an owner who is responsible for managing that risk. It is the absolute core practical tool. All right, now let's talk about a huge strategic decision. This one comes from the very top. It's called risk appetite. It basically answers the question, how much risk are we willing to take on to meet our goals? A tech startup might have a really high appetite for risk, while a hospital would have a very, very low one.
And you guessed it, this brings us right back to the auditor. A massive part of their job is making sure that the decisions being made by the teams on the ground actually match up with the official risk appetite that leadership said they were comfortable with. It's a super important check for strategic alignment.
So for our final section, let's put the spotlight squarely on the information systems auditor to really understand their critical role in this entire ecosystem.
So you can think of the IS auditor as wearing 4 main hats here. They evaluate if the organization has even identified the right risks. They assess if the controls that have been put in place are actually working effectively. They verify compliance with all the policies, and ultimately they provide assurance, that confidence, to leadership that the whole risk management process is sound.
So when you boil it all down, the entire job of an IS audit in this space can be summed up by this one single powerful question. Answering this is their core mission.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that effective risk management isn't just one thing. It's a complete system. It's about integrating those big picture frameworks like ISO, the nitty-gritty methods from NIST, and practical tools like the risk register. When all these pieces work together, an organization can truly protect itself and achieve its goals. And that is what we wanted to explain today. Thanks for joining us.